Welcome to Authenticity, which is all about shaping high-performance workplace culture. My name is Simon Tyson, and in my role as CEO of the Real Learning Experience, I've been working with organisations for nearly 30 years, helping them create exceptional workplaces. As a leader, you know the daily effort needed to create a culture that produces great results and in which team members and customers are happy. Those things do not happen by accident. The journey isn't always easy, and that's why this podcast exists. Make sure you subscribe as we share our experiences and strategies to help you transform the workplace culture you have into the workplace culture you want.
Hi listeners, and welcome back to Authenticity, Transforming Workplace Cultures. Today we have one of our bonus format episodes which we call Front Page Leadership. This format addresses topical subjects within the media that have a strong underlying leadership message within. We take the headlines and the stories and we discuss and extract the leadership lessons to be learnt for our listeners. Before we move on to today's topic, I would like to welcome my co-host Simon Tyson.
Thanks, Kiralee, and good to be here again. Today, we're going to do another one of our front page leadership editions, as you've said, and our regular listeners will be delighted to know I'm not going to mention cricket other than that one mentioned just then. So this is a story that's appeared in the last 24 hours on the ABC News app that I have on my phone. And the headline is, as the COVID pandemic rolls on, there's never been a better time for Australia to move to a 4-day week. And we've got a lot of thoughts and opinions around that. We've got some policies within our own organisation that relate to flexibility in work. And I thought it would be a really great topic for us to pick up. Now, as usual, I've got lots of opinions. Kiralee, you've actually done the hard work and done some research. So could we perhaps start there with the actual substance and facts?
We definitely can. So we'll start off with how did we get to a 5-day working week? So for those of you that don't know, in 1856, Melbourne stonemasons became the first workers in the world to achieve an 8-hour working day. It's a landmark that we still commemorate with public holidays in most states and territories. It's called the 8-hour day in Tasmania and Labor Day elsewhere in the country.
It is indeed.
It took almost a century before the 8-hour day became the norm, and for the 6-hour week, these stonemasons still worked to be reduced. But finally, in 1948, the Commonwealth Arbitration Court approved a 40-hour, 5-day working week for all Australians. The weekend was born. A 5-day week brought us the weekend. Thanks to steady increases in productivity, all this was achieved even while living standards improved steadily. Increases in leisure continued over the next few decades, and in 1945, Australian workers were granted 2 weeks annual leave. This was extended to 3 weeks in 1963 and to 4 weeks in 1974. Sick leave, long service leave, and an increased number of public holidays all reduced the number of hours worked per year. But the standard of the working week remained fixed at 5 days. In 1998, the Conciliation and Arbitration Commission cleared the way for the working week to be cut from 40 to 38 hours, which is where we still remain today.
Yes, so slightly shorter days, but still 5 days.
Yeah, so there's been no significant reduction in the standard hours since.
So let me just, was it 1948 you said when
Yes.
the 5 day? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So not much has changed in the world since then, of course. I mean, it's only 82 years and there's been very little change in technology, in customer expectations, in people's priorities. I can't see why we'd need to change anything now.
That's exactly what I thought.
It's amazing, isn't it? And it reminds me a bit of some of the ridiculous laws we've got in a whole bunch of areas of our life that are based on something that happened 100 years ago, 200 years ago. Sometimes in Australia, it's even based on English law, so something that's never happened in our country. So I guess the issue is that we don't challenge these things, that we just accept it as it is what it is. Without asking, does it get the best results?
Absolutely.
Is there any other background you want to throw in before we?
No, that's pretty much the background that they've given in the article, and then they just talk about what making the transition to a 4-day week would look like.
And when And, we have a lot of conversations with clients around the structure of their organisation. So part of our process of authenticity is aligning the things you do, say, think and decide with the culture, the workplace culture you want to create rather than the one you've got. And sometimes it involves moving away from long-held traditions. Sometimes it might involve being more flexible, being more contemporary. What do you think the biggest barriers are for organisations in looking at something like a 5-day work week and saying, actually, we don't need to hang on to that. It doesn't actually have any value for us anymore. We could do this a different way. What do you think the biggest barriers are?
I think the biggest barrier into embracing a change like shifting from a 5-day week to a 4-day week is trust. And it's the trust that organisations and managers need to have in their people. And for a long time, that trust hasn't been at the forefront of the decision making, and a lot of organisations and a lot of companies and a lot of people were thrust in the deep end when we had COVID amongst us and we couldn't go to work and everyone had to work from home. They didn't have a choice. There was a lot of to-ing and fro-ing. Can we trust this person to work from home? Will they do the right thing? How do we monitor them? How do we make sure productivity doesn't go down? There was no time to work out the ifs, buts and maybes. Everybody just had to make plans, make it work. And that's where people saw that their workers didn't just survive, they thrive. And there's been so many organisations that have adopted those processes. I know in Melbourne, in the CBD, since COVID first hit and the work from home orders, PricewaterhouseCoopers have downsized I think they had like 4 or 5 levels and they've gone down to 2 simply because
immense offices they had there.
Yeah, and that's 2 levels of hot desks. They're not permanent desks. Yeah. They're people that are hot desks. For me, it's trust. And I was reading an article the other day that addressed when you have an employee start with you, where your trust level is with them. And the right way it should be is we trust them, because we've hired them and we trust that they can do the job and we trust that they're a cultural fit for the organisation. And so they have the trust, and whether it remains or whether it reduces is in accordance to how the relationship plays out. But a lot of the time there's no trust and people go, oh, well, they need to earn my trust. And so I think it's flicking the switch on that perception of it's not about trust, essentially.
And look, I think that whole philosophy of I've got to earn my trust is fundamentally flawed, isn't it? Because people tend to reciprocate. So trust is one of the most reciprocal dynamics in the workplace. So people who feel trusted tend to be trustworthy and they tend to trust back. Now, if we don't trust our people, then they will act in a less trustworthy way and they will trust us less and the whole relationship gets damaged. And I've always believed that if you trust no one, you harm every relationship and make it very hard to build trust. If you trust everyone, 5% of people will bite you on the bum, but 95% of people will prove you right. And so if you're prepared to take that risk, it's a really minor risk most of the time, and adapt when you realise that someone can't be trusted, but default to trusting people in general, then I think you get better outcomes. But if I could just wind back a bit, I'm going to weave another thing in here. I think it's about tradition and trust. And I think what organisations do is they trust that people will work when they're in the office working 5 days because that's what they've always done.
Yeah.
And sometimes we trust things for no good reason other than it's the way we've always done things. And changing things seems to break that covenant of trust that, well, how can I trust they'll work in that environment? Well, how can you trust they'll work in the environment they're in right now unless you're watching them all the time? And having them under the company roof, that's no guarantee that they're going to work harder. Having them work 5 days instead of 4, that's no guarantee they're going to work harder. So I think the perceived threat from all these flexibilities is much higher, whereas in fact the greatest threat is poor leadership. Because if it's poor leadership that creates the environment in which people aren't clear on expectations, aren't held accountable, aren't given appropriate feedback, aren't supported to develop the skills they need to do the job well. And if you do all of those things, most people will grab it with two hands and run. Sometimes you'll get someone who does the wrong thing and then you've got to respond. But I do see it more as a leadership issue than a trust issue. It should be a leadership issue rather than a trust issue. But for the managers that out there that are going, oh, don't know if I can cope with that, absolutely, I think it comes down to trust.
And if your organisation system processes that sits behind the scenes creates an environment of accountability, and that's not watching someone remotely work all day, that's having reporting systems that make people accountable for KPIs and targets. That's having communication, having check-ins, having meetings, having those constant open lines of communication so that it feels like we work remotely. We're in two completely different states. And most of the days it feels like we are in the same office because there's that open line of communication that we have. Sometimes you feel like you should be a lot further than two states and it's still not far enough for me to
I was going to say, that open line of communication, I just every time I turn around, you're on the phone checking up on me. But no, I agree with you. And I think we often have conversations about the policies we have within our own business, and managers, executives, boards look at us and they're shocked and they can't quite conceive how it's possible. So one of our policies is that we have unlimited annual leave. Our team can take as much annual leave as they want, and they have to apply for it because we have to manage workflow and all that sort of stuff, but it's never rejected on the basis of you've used up your allocation. And that actually came about because it was you, Kiralee, that were away on holiday at one point. And we were chatting and I said, how's your holiday? And you said, oh, it's great, but it's been raining for 2 weeks and next week's beautiful, but we've got to come home. And I said, well, don't come home. And you said to me, but I need to save up my leave because we've got this trip planned in the middle of the year. And I just realised all of a sudden that there was this barrier to you balancing your life effectively, and it wasn't necessary. It was serving no real purpose. And so it was pretty much a spontaneous decision, as a lot of things are in our organisation, that let's abolish 4 weeks annual leave. Let's just make it unlimited. Now, what obviously comes with that is our people are held accountable.
Yeah.
So if someone takes the piss, we trust everyone to do the right thing. But if someone takes the piss and just wants to take too much time off without getting the results, then there'd be a conversation. If they want to take leave and not support the rest of the team, so they're always letting the rest of the team down, then there'd be a conversation. But we're not going to shy away from giving that freedom, but we recognise it also puts more pressure on you and I in particular to maintain accountability.
Yeah.
So we're all expected to do a great job, but if someone can do a great job in 3 weeks a month and take the fourth one off, happy days, good on them. That would support that every day of the week, would never look at that and say, oh gosh, that's 12 weeks a year. Would look at it and say, they're doing a great job and they're living a great life.
Yeah. And look, we appreciate that doesn't work for every organisation and every occupation, but we find it works for us because we have a really good balance and we have that accountability. We have those really open, honest conversations. And there's a lot of times where we find ourselves working, not a lot, but we find ourselves working, on weekends or after 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock at night, or we're traveling after hours and things like that. So it just comes with that balance of we don't have a clock in, clock off, way of doing things, that we just have, we get the job done, we go hard when we need to, and then there's times where we have that flexibility where we can kind of have that recharge.
And I'll come to those industries where it's harder in a minute, but it really comes down to what do we want to measure?
That's right.
I want to measure your attendance, or do I want to measure someone's output, their contribution to the team? And in reality, attendance is just a measure of where they happen to be for the day. It's not a measure of having added any value. So I'm a really big believer that be as flexible as you possibly can. Another thing we often say in our organisation is it's impossible to be late for work because there is no start time. Now, if we've got a meeting scheduled, there's a start time because that's a commitment to each other, but that's not a start time for work. That's just respect to the rest of the team. We're happy for people to come and go as they please if they've got, for example, a good example of this. If one of our team, me included, couldn't go to my child's sporting event, I'd resent work because it's a barrier to me living the life I want. If I can go to that because my workplace provides the flexibility, 99% of people will respond with gratitude and a sense of obligation, a sense of wanting to give back.
Yeah.
And I'm a really big believer in that philosophy of allow people to embrace their lives while committing to their work. And they shouldn't be mutually exclusive. I hate the phrase work-life balance, which our politicians banged on about a lot of 3 or 4 years ago. They tried to mount this great campaign around creating work-life balance. That's all bullshit. Work is part of life. So what we should just be talking about is life balance, and work is one of the things we need to balance within that. And when we see it that way, we tend to take a different attitude.
And we've seen it work, obviously works well in our own organisation, but we've seen it work really well in some much larger organisations compared to Absolutely. Us as well, that we've either been in contact with as customers of theirs or customers of ours, we've been able to benchmark what we do and how we do it against other people that work really well and see it can work. And there's probably a lot of listeners out there going, oh gosh, there would be just mayhem if we adopted that in our workplace. But there isn't.
I'm going to issue a challenge in a minute. I will, but I'll give another example. An organisation that we did some work with, about 500 employees, they had this whole running system of toil. So people would accumulate a bit of extra hours, a bit of extra time. They'd work through lunch or they'd come in early or finish late, and they'd document it. And then they'd want to take a little bit of that to go to some, one of the children's concerts, or to take a half day off to go out for lunch for a wedding anniversary or whatever. They had this whole complex process of people submitting forms and then submitting requests to use that time. And fundamentally, it came down to tradition and trust, because that's the way they'd always measured it. And why do you measure it that way? Because you've got to hold people accountable. You've got to watch them. Bullshit. So what we suggested to them is just say to people, you do your job. I don't need to know that you're here at 9 o'clock on the dot. I don't need to know that you're leaving at 5 o'clock on the dot. I just need to know that you're doing a great job. That's all I need to know. So they changed that. They reduced this massive administrative burden. They treated people with respect and dignity and trust, and productivity went up significantly. And I think, and again, I know there's jobs where there's limitations, and I am coming to that, but I think I challenge organisations to don't ask the question, is this something we should think about? Be honest with yourselves and say, is there actually any reason we can't do something like this? Because I think if we say, should we, you'll find reasons not to.
Absolutely. And the worst case scenario is you allow someone to do that and they, as you say, take the piss, and you have a conversation with them about it.
Absolutely. And I have no objection.
But that's what it is. It comes down to what we always talk about, is having these honest, robust conversations about performance and about accountability. That's what it comes down to. You then, as a leader, you're not trying to get through mountains of paperwork of processing toil leave and processing this. You're having a conversation, you're being a leader, and you're coaching that person to become better at their job.
And be more accountable and having that really honest conversation of, look, we've got this here, but it cuts both ways. There is a commitment to each way. I have no objection to someone within a team not having access to that flexibility based upon their failure to perform or based upon their lack of willingness to be accountable. I'm a really big believer in remove as many rules and boundaries as you can for the people that will do the right thing, and then ease a few back in place for those that won't. So now a lot of our clients work in really structured environments, and I'm thinking of places like childcare centres where they work to ratios. You've got to have a certain number of educators per child or for groups of children, nursing, where you've got to have people on the ward, etc. And I know you can't just have people wander in and wander out. That would cause chaos. And I know that they can't apply these principles in the same way that we might talk about them today. But my challenge is, have you thought about how you can provide flexibility, how you can provide people with more control over their lives, and it might be 10% of what we've just suggested, but I think 99% of employees will understand that that's the limit. They'll say, within the context of my workplace and my role, I can't expect more flexibility than that, but I'm being given every bit of reasonable flexibility given my work. And I think employers look at that and they go, that's great. I'm being treated like an adult. I'm being treated with respect. What I think it does, it then flows through to the sort of people who populate your team. So if you've got people that you hold accountable but give flexibility to, then I think you attract people who've got more choices and are attracted to the workplace because it's a desirable place to be. Whereas if you've got people who have to be watched like a hawk and have a really suffocating process or framework that they work in, and that's the only way they can do their work, then again, I think you probably don't get the same calibre of people. Can I give you one more quick example, Kirralie?
Absolutely.
We hear all the time from clients about their reservations with, should I really give people flexibility and so on. Now, one of the things I'm going to say is you will broaden your talent pool by doing it. So there's obviously some serious gender inequalities caused by gender inequalities caused by lack of flexibility.
Yeah.
I think whether it's gender, whether it's child caring arrangements, whether it's education, whatever it might be, anytime we can remove a barrier that doesn't need to be there, we deepen our pool and we make our workplaces more equitable. And there's a client that I'm thinking of that we've done a lot of work with, quite physical work, an ageing workforce, and one of their biggest issues is a lot of long-term employees is the diminishing productivity of older workers. And that's one of the workplaces that we deal with that is the most resistant and has been the most resistant for the longest time to flexible work arrangements. Yet the solution to the diminishing productivity of some of these people doing highly physically demanding work, and it would also be something highly desirable to these people, is to offer them the ability to reduce to 4 and 3 days a week, so that the physical toll's not as high, they're graduating into retirement, it's better for them, it's better for the workplace. And I just shake my head when I hear stories of organisations like that just almost refusing to consider the benefits of that because they're so stuck with these tradition and trust issues.
Yeah. My husband's workplace is going through this at the moment, the very early stages of exploring the possibilities of this. They work in the metal fabrication industry, and anybody that knows anyone that works in that field, it's a bit of a dying trade. There's hardly any apprentices or young kids or young people that want to become welders nowadays, and we are rurally based, and so it's even harder to compete with people that are working in a major town city. So they're in the process of doing this exact same thing of weighing up the pros and cons. They feel that it's a pro, but they just want to consider all sides before they decide that's the way they're going to do. But their reasoning for it is at the moment they're just so busy. They can't attract they need more workers. They can't attract the workers. So they feel that this is a really it's a positive thing for someone to be able to come and work a 4-day week and have Fridays off. So that'll help with recruitment. Also, because they are so busy, they have been working 6 days a week for as long as they can remember. They had a break over Christmas, but they're really genuinely concerned about employee burnout. And obviously, because they work there, they're allotted contracted hours, and then they have overtime that people can choose to work. So they feel that by reducing it back to 4 days and then offering Friday, the 5th day, as overtime, then people still get that weekend, and they reduce that risk of burnout because they just have so many projects ahead that they're just worried what's going to happen. And it's a huge change for them. They're a massive organisation. They have almost 200 employees. They export what they manufacture Australia-wide and often worldwide. So it's a really big decision for them. But there's also some positives as well that they're considering, and that's and I've seen these in a couple of reports that I've read on this, is that there's for organisations there's fewer overhead costs because they're not running the days that they are. So there are so all organisations start to go, oh, but what if? There's the obvious benefits of the staff, but then there is the running costs and the environmental benefits. A 4-day week critically reduces each individual employee's carbon footprint by removing commute pollution, and that in turn comes on to people's running costs of cars, because we live regionally, so a lot of people drive out here every day. So there are a lot of benefits once you take that step of going, okay, instead of going, should we, okay, we're going to consider this. What are the benefits? There are a lot of benefits to be had for organisations.
Massive. And look, one of the things that happens is when people, and we know this from some of the productivity work we do, that when people have less time, their productivity doesn't decrease proportionately. So they may in 4 days do less than they do in 5 days. But what they tend to do is the most important stuff anyway. So it's actually the least meaningful stuff that gets cut from the bottom, and they tend to fit the most important things into those 4 days. So productivity might drop by 2% with a cut in time of 20%. There are organisations out there that are willing to pay people for 5 days and only ask them to work for 4. And some of the early research coming out of that is it's actually increased productivity. Look, there'd be a whole bunch of factors around that. You've got happy, satisfied people who feel a sense of obligation and want to contribute. You're attracting a better calibre of person.
I've got some facts on that. Would you like to hear those?
I'd love to hear them.
In April 2018, a firm ran that exact experiment where they reduced their work week from 40 hours to 32 for all of its 240 employees while still paying them the same salaries. They hired a pair of researchers to record the results, and what they found shows positive support for the 4-day working week, which was 24% more employees felt they could successfully balance their work and personal lives together.
Yeah.
Stress decreased by 7% among everyone involved, and overall work satisfaction increased by 5%. Above all, their actual job performance didn't change when doing it over 4 days instead of 5, but the benefit of the extra free day meant employees were exceptionally motivated to meet productivity requirements. This motivation inspired workers to devise better work habits and to waste less of their work time. Supervisor said staff were more creative, their attendance was better, they were on time, they didn't leave early or take long breaks.
Yeah.
So
there's study after study that shows these sorts of outcomes. I guess in closing, and look, for me, it's actually quite topical. I've just had, yesterday was a public holiday here in Hobart. I'm not even sure what it was for, but the Great Aussie Long Weekend. I had 3 days. Now, I had 2 very busy days of activity and exercise, and I was pretty trashed Sunday night, and the feeling of having a recovery day on Monday where we got to do some things as a family, caught up on a few things, I just felt like I recovered. I feel like I've had a huge break because I've been able to pack so much into those 3 days, including recovery, that I wouldn't in 2. And I've come into work this morning absolutely kicking goals, just charging through the to-do list. And now I that's a one-off example, but I feel like that's the sort of thing that happens. And I also do feel, gosh, I've only got 4 days left in this week. I really need to get motivated and prioritize the top things. So yes, I might get less done, but they're going to be the things at the very bottom of my list. And to be honest, with the energy and the intensity, I may not even get less done. So what I want to challenge organizations to do, whether it's unlimited annual leave like we do, whether it's abolishing work hours like we have, if it's the 4-day week, which is something that we haven't done. We don't need to because of the other arrangements we've got in place, whether it's work from home or partially work from home, whatever that flexibility is, challenge yourself. Ask yourself, is there really any reason we can't at least give this a go, and maybe give it a go for some people? And in organisations, you know what, it's sometimes not going to be fair. So, for example, in a hospital, you might have administrative staff that can work like that, and you can increase their productivity and increase their satisfaction by giving them those flexibilities. You may not be able to give the same flexibilities to nursing staff who are actually on the wards. So look for what you can do in each role. I'm absolutely certain that if you treat people with trust and respect, that the vast majority, not all, the vast majority of the time, it'll come back to you in increased gratitude, increased engagement, increased productivity.
Even just have a conversation. If you're with your staff, if we could be more flexible, what would that look like?
Yeah.
There's no guarantees, there's no promises, but there might be some really quick wins you can get up on the board that opens up those communication lines, shows some flexibility, increases the morale of your staff, increases productivity.
And now this sounds brilliant in my head, but I just thought of it, and I've got no idea whether it is brilliant when I say it. So, just Kiralee, cut this bit if it's absolute rubbish, really, please. But we don't want our people seeing work as just an interruption to the rest of their life. So what we have to do as employers and leaders is stop seeing the rest of their life as an interruption to their work, and recognise that the two things, that work is part of life. And when we help people live an enriched and engaging life, including the opportunity to do work, but also to attend to the other things that are important to them, we have to get better outcomes.
Definitely. Okay, well, I look forward to the next time
I do,
we have
and
another topical discussion like this.
And I'm going to feel some pressure to do some research at some point instead of just have opinions. But
let's just stick to what we both do best. We'll stick to our strengths.
Yep. Duly noted. I think you're right. Thanks, Kiralee.
Thanks, Simon.
Thanks for listening to Authenticity, Shaping High-Performance Workplace Culture. If this episode has provided you with strategies, insights, or inspiration, head to your favourite podcasting app and make sure you subscribe to be notified of future episodes. To get a sense of how your current culture measures up, you can take our Authentimeter, a free online assessment. It will take you about 10 minutes and give you an indicator of exactly how authentic your culture is. You can find that at authenticity.com.au/podcast.